And I'd just like to welcome our audience, ladies and gentlemen, to this event today. And I'm pleased to also welcome my speakers today, Councillor Ashedu Joel and Dr. Simon. I want to say I recognize your presence, and I'll say it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for joining us. And also thank you to all those people and everyone joining from Africa. I can see some people from different parts of UK also joining us. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone can hear me. Last year, we had something similar. We particularly focused on mothers and the experience that they undergo as women and as entrepreneurs. But today, we are going to be looking at everybody, professionals, individuals, and we're going to be hearing from their experience in today's event. So we are going to be looking at obviously, I'm going to be making a brief introduction, and then we have our speakers, and there's going to be time for a brief reflection because it's not just about listening to experiences, it's about reflecting on it and making sense of what we learn. That's the whole idea. And why are we doing this? Because we've seen from research that by listening to other people's experiences that we learn and we grow. However, it's not just about listening. It comes through a process of making sense of it and then moving forward from what we have learned. So this is a space in which this can happen. Now let's go on to resilience. I had a very interesting conversation with resilience earlier in the week and with one of our speakers. And to be honest, I must say that every time I talk about this, I discover that people have different perspectives, and it's good for us to actually understand what exactly we mean or what exactly resilience is. So I will be less academic in my discussion today. I'm going to be very informal. And that's because most times we always take a lot of time talking about things academically, but we have a diverse audience, and I do recognize that. So from research and from what I've researched, I could see that resilience is described in so many ways and is being defined in so many ways, with origin from health and developmental literature, where resilience was first talked about in the area of health and psychology, children that are falling sick, children that are struggling, and how they try and how they adjust, the struggles and how they adjust. That's where it all began. And then going on to resilience in adults. So basically, resilience has its roots from the field of health and psychology. So we recognize that. And so basically in literature, we have people describing resilience as the ability to bounce back, overcoming adversity. From the psychological literature, it's more like enduring. It's a trait which helps us to be stable in terms of adversity. So if you look at some of these definitions, you see that it's quite positive. It's looking at it from the positive perspective. However, we all know that sometimes things are not really as positive as we are. Sometimes we might even prepare, but things go wrong. So that's what we're looking at today. We're looking at that aspect where we've done all we could, and then things just go wrong. So looking at that part, then it means that there needs to be a certain level of adaptation. So that's where the self-control, describing resilience as a form of controlling self, adapting to change, the capacity to learn from experience. So you can see that something negative has happened. It's not positive like the initial ones, which is the ability to bounce back, because sometimes we might not have that ability. Sometimes we might just struggle. So we recognize that. And that's why we say resilience is not strength. However, we're looking at the vulnerability. We're looking at how do you rise again? How do you adjust? How do you adapt? And that is what we're talking about. So in all this, I like the description of resilience as the process. I like that because it's not, even though it's not, even though you can say it's a bit negative, or it acknowledges the fact that things go wrong. Let me put it that way. So that perspective or that definition of resilience acknowledges that something, or the fact that life is not perfect and things could go wrong and that we are vulnerable. So that's what we're acknowledging today. And we're not beating ourselves up. So why is resilience crucial? So I'm not going to be so academic like I said today. It's because it's been recognized as an enduring and stable, a trait that can allow you to be stable when things are not stable. So that's trying to be stable. So it recognizes that there could be traumatic experiences, there could be tragedies, there could be adversities, but there's something that can help you. So I criticize, or I agree with the criticism of some of these definitions, which is talking about resilience as something that makes you be able to swiftly return to normal. It might not be swift. So we acknowledge that it might not be swift. It might not be quickly. It might not be easy. So today we want to recognize that it might not be easy. It might not be quick. So, and that is the criticism of resilience, which I quite also agree with in terms of it fails to, sometimes people fail to recognize the cultural, the contextual differences in people, and the fact that people differ in the way they respond to experiences, and in the way, in the context, and how context can affect the way people respond. So that is why we allow this space, for people to explore, and then to really build on the experiences of others, and then also develop their own competencies from listening to the experiences of others. Now, looking at, because it's International Women's Day, so I recognize women, and I recognize and acknowledge that they go through a lot of challenges, and especially the role that women play in the family. It's multifaceted in the sense that women go through, they manage the home, they manage the family, they are thinking about the children, and sometimes there are also crises and there are problems, and women are trying to adjust in these situations. So apart from women, we also have individuals, professionals, everybody in the day-to-day life. I mean, everybody is affected. If there's a war, a disaster, a crisis, everyone is affected, not just women and children. So resilience is something that applies to all. And what are the implications of this? So the implication is generally not just for female entrepreneurs, not just for women, for everyone, is the fact that the implication of this is the fact that we have an open attitude and we are proactive. So it enables us to have that level of preparedness. If we're in business, we start to prepare ahead. We don't wait for it to happen. So it allows us, and then we start to think about the various strategies that we can put up when this happens. So it allows us to plan. So recognizing this, hearing about how other people have, maybe faced similar experiences, would give us that knowledge to be able to plan, and then to say, okay, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I can apply this in my own situation. This is how I can apply this in my own context. So overall, today, we're going to be recognizing the vulnerabilities, the differences, the contextual differences in people, the differences in their experiences. And it's just that space for us to acknowledge the fact that we are different, we react differently, and our experiences differ. And so I'm going to stop sharing now. So I will be introducing one of our speakers. I'm just going to read out a brief profile. Councillor Shedu, are you ready? Okay, so
yes, I am.
Councillor Ashedu Joel is an experienced consultant, non-executive director, trustee, community advocate with over 20 years experience across a range of sectors: corporate, academic, community, voluntary, and public sectors. Ashedu is the founder of Ashoma Consults, a sociocultural capital and inclusive leadership company. She is an engineer by training with a doctoral research in sustainable development, focusing on governance and resilience. She has held several broad-level strategic advisory and governance-focused appointments. She's an award-winning practitioner and engagement strategist. As an inclusive leadership and engagement strategist, Councillor Shedu advocates and promotes dialogue that aims to constructively challenge the status quo across racial, cultural, and socio-economic backgrounds, promoting equity of opportunities for collaboration. Ashwedu is also a campaigner for the active engagement of ethnic minority communities in the civic and political spaces. Please join me in welcoming Councillor Ashwedu to today's. So the floor is yours, and we would love to hear from you.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to firstly say thank you very much to yourself, Dr. Ngozi, for the invitation to participate in this conversation, to do several things, one of which is to recognize and mark the International Women's Day, but also to begin to speak to some of these notions about ourselves and our growth and development, both as individuals in whatever spaces or sectors that we find ourselves. Resilience, I think, is an interesting concept or an interesting word, because in the last maybe 10, 15 years, it has gathered momentum and it has become one of the go-to words that everybody talks about, including governments. So, and interestingly, it's of personal interest to me, because it is something that I looked at as part of my doctoral research. So when you sort of said we're going to be talking about resilience, it made me laugh. I thought, oh, very interesting. So you've given it a good, I think, summary background into resilience from an academic and I think a research perspective, even though you said you're not going to be very academic. So, and I'm not going to go over what you said. But I think I will just draw on the point that when people talk about resilience, immediately the image that comes to mind is around our ability to recover swiftly when we face adverse conditions, or when we find ourselves in situations that we're not entirely sure how we're going to navigate, but somehow we manage to navigate it. What do we do, and how do we overcome those challenges? How do we learn to cope with adversity while still keeping the image of everything is still going on well? Because as individuals, one of the things we don't like to share immediately is the fact that we're not coping, we're not able to handle it all. And so what does this then do to us, do to our psyche, do to people around us, that we're often not aware of until time has traveled, and then we start to recognize that one singular incident marks me so much so, and marked everything else and my response to everything else, without me really coming to understand it. It pushes us to the place of learning to adapt, or dipping into our self coded adaptability nodes. Well, how do we learn really quickly? So for me, because I think there are 4 touch points you said you wanted us to explore in coming to this conversation, and one of it was to share something that had happened that I felt had profoundly shaped me, and I could look back and say that gave me some ability to describe myself as being resilient in that space and or at that point in time, and then go on to talk about what the effect had been on me, what I had learned from it, and then how does this now apply to every other thing going forward. So I'm going to speak now from a position of my navigating a very, what I would call, nuanced cultural system, and framing it around leadership development. Because each and every person, I believe, in whatever walk of life you are from. One of the things that we all aspire to is to find ourselves in that place where we can take ownership of our journey, our success, our growth, and however or whoever we lead, there is responsibility there. So I'm going to be tracking back nearly 30 years now. So I spent a good part of my childhood traveling with my parents and my siblings, because my dad had an engineering business in Wales. He had a partnership business there. And as a child, there's so many things that don't really come up in your mind, because you see yourself as wherever you go is home. You make friends, you do whatever you want to do. And then when I came in my early 20s to do my master's, going back near enough 30 years now, God, 20, 29 years ago, I was very shocked at the fact that a country that I had never really seen the differentials, or it became very glaring that there were opposing forces to how I saw myself. So I saw myself as a young, educated graduate, engineering graduate. I had lots of potential. I had lots of drive. I had lots of ambition. But I was thrust into a society that had lots of structural barriers to how I could develop, not just as a professional, but as a woman, as a part of an up and coming member of the workforce. And I think the first semblance of that was going into lectures, and you copiously take notes, you come away, you go to the library, you do all that you want to do, and then I'd return on a Monday morning and be thinking, this conversation I'm hearing in the lecture theatre is so different to what was. So I was one of a cohorts. My master's was in environmental and energy engineering, and I was the only Black female on the course. So most of my colleagues were male from different parts of the world, but predominantly European. And I couldn't understand why what I thought on Friday did not marry what I was experiencing or hearing or seeing on Monday. It was that I was missing a culture. I had missed a big loop. So I don't drink, I don't smoke. I'm coming from a strict culture where, as a woman, there's just certain things that just must never cross your consciousness. So going to the pub or all those things, it's not part of, my African or my Nigerian culture. But here it is part and parcel of how is a rite of passage from when you sort of turn, get into your teenage years. People are kind of brought into that um, expectation. And on Fridays, everybody would go to the pub with their lecturer, because suddenly there is no divide between who is the lecturer and who is the student. We all become, one big happy family. And then people talk freely about every single thing that is happening. I was never in that circle, so I could never really experience those conversations or be part of them or use the knowledge gleaned from those conversations to plan and shape and go forward. And I always felt out of place and out of sync with the general mood of the cohort. And why am I sharing this? Because a lot of people come into new spaces believing that the space is ready to accommodate them, ready to provide all it takes for you and I and every other person to grow, to thrive. And in that moment, I think when it really dawned on me was when I was walking home one afternoon, and I was saying to one of my colleagues, Costas, I never forget, Greek guy, and he was saying, "Oh, Ashdru, you never come to the pub," and I thought, "What?" the pub. He said, yeah, that we have, and you know, if he had poured cold water on me, I couldn't have felt it any worse than the fact that, my God, I've spent months and months and months, and this is nearing up the end of the second semester, and I have missed out on so much because something that was natural and expected and part of how people did business in quote, which was alien to the culture I was coming from, had deprived me of feeling completely included and part of the journey of the group. And I remember sharing, my frustrations and my pain with my mom. I felt really hard done by. And she said something which really shocked me. She said, well, next Friday, you need to get dressed and go out with them. And I thought, this cannot be coming from, does my mom know what she's saying? But I did. And it opened up a whole new world to me. And how is this linked to my journey of resilience? I had to learn to unlearn certain cultural norms that had limited me, where I had situated myself quite firmly in the do's and the don'ts of a way of life and a culture that didn't permit, certain societal or social norms. But moving into a whole new country, the culture is really different. Going to the pub is a way of socializing, is a way of life. Like in the Nigerian culture, where going to parties, weddings, and loud events are part and parcel of how we do social business. But I took that experience and then translated it forward into my working life. But what I didn't expect was that it wasn't just enough for me to want to be available to socialize. I needed to be able to battle the limitations of being different, because in a university, in an academic setting, you can almost kind of, the lines almost kind of blur themselves as a student when you're moving from one event to the next. But moving into the corporate space, the lines are not so blurred anymore. It isn't just about the fact that I was now very aware that these are the social norms and this is how you get to actively integrate. But how do I go past my willingness to integrate and get acceptance with the fact that I don't look and sound like everybody else? I am unashamedly ambitious, and I'm willing to put myself out there to say, I'm ready to do this. I want to learn about this. I want to have this conversation. I know this and I can contribute to this. And being pushed back, where there is a decided system that says this person is allowed with least force, but you have to double, triple, quadruple prove that you can actually come into this space and add value. But I have been adding value. I have always added value. I have always come to every single task, project, meeting, every single space, 110% giving of myself. But I am still on the outside. I'm still outside of the main conversations where I need to be. So, how did I then turn that around to enable me to get into the spaces and into those places where I felt I ought to be and I could add value and I should be making a difference there? It was about understanding that, one, not everybody is as open minded as they initially perceive or are perceived to be. We come at things from sometimes the natural bias of, I am not sure of who this person is. I don't know what to expect. I don't know if I'll be able to relate to them. So in that regard, I will hold back until they go 150% out of their way to assuage my fears. And you see it in teams where you bring teams from, multicultural backgrounds. And the initial stages, everybody's still trying to learn about everybody. People are, understanding what upsets, what doesn't upset. How do I say this? What does this mean in this culture or to this person's uh, uh, social construct when I say certain things and when I do certain things? Moving into developing myself in the leadership space, I had to understand, or I had to make very conscious decisions around how I grew myself, who I brought in or kept out to be able to give me the space mentally, emotionally, psychologically to develop. I had to learn to trust that it wasn't always about the other person. Maybe my perceptions too need to be reframed. And that's something that I often see where we already have a very fixed mindset of what we want, how we expect to be treated, how we expect to be welcomed, how we expect our ideas and our suggestions to land. And when they don't land that way, there is often the knee jerk reaction of, I'm going to possibly keep to myself because that I wasn't particularly welcome there. But I like to flip it around and ask myself, how could I have done that differently? So for me, it's about, am I able to reframe this particular challenge? And in my space and in my situation, it was about understanding that every time I met a roadblock, as I like to refer to them, there were opportunities for me to show off my skills. There were opportunities for me to show off my abilities and the possible opportunities that I was going to be bringing in. So what is my value added? Those were, critical moments for me to demonstrate what I was bringing into the conversation, how I was going to be taking or leveraging my cross-cultural learning exposure into a space and a team that perhaps is still very much fledgling in its understanding of what it means to have diversity, not just of thought, but diversity in all ramifications within the, um, the space. So moving on from reframing the challenge for me mentally, I had to then go on to look at how do I utilize the people around me. So how do I use them to build a new network, a new cohort of support and advocacy that I could always dip into. I'll give an example. In a particular role that I was in, one of the real challenges at the time was getting past the uh, mindset of how do we bring other voices into the space. So I was leading a project which was multi-agency in its approach. It was not just looking only at that particular area. We were looking, regionally. So how do I step out of my space of being an expert, if you like, at working with local communities or localized settings, to being able to devolve my strengths, my talents, my abilities to bring people from across the region into it who perhaps I have never engaged with, but I need to be able to demonstrate that I have what it takes to lead this group, to bring something different, to draw people in, and that takes a humble. You need to be humble enough to look inwards, to ask yourself, how do I relate to people? How do I approach people? How do I draw people in? Am I warm and welcoming, or am I very business-like, very transactional in how I choose to engage with people? So I want somebody in and I say, well, Dr. Ngozi, I need you to do A, B, C, D. And once it's done, Bob's your uncle. I move on to the next person that I perhaps want to bring into my space. Do I nurture that relationship with yourself, so that going forwards you then become not just a professional colleague, but you become an ally, you become an advocate for future collaborative partnerships. And that is how I have often, I have gone on to ensure that challenging situations, I turn them around and ensure that I keep those relationships, those doors, I try to keep them open. But also, I am very clear in myself that some doors cannot be kept open because they are just very volatile. Um, I am very aware that there's a human cost to it. So, what does it mean for me to be adaptable, for me to learn from every situation? Do I count the cost to myself? Do I count the cost to the people around me? How do I ensure that when I face really difficult situations that I need to step away from everything to reframe and rethink and reset, that those around me who normally I would draw support from, or sometimes who rely on me for whatever reason, are also not going to be traumatized by in that process of me trying to recover from the huge, extensive setback or challenge that I have faced or I am facing. Because um, we never go through challenges on our own. That has been my experience. We sometimes think that because this is happening to me, it isn't happening to, it's just happening to me, but it's happening to every person that is in our close circle. And they all have ways in which they respond to that individual trauma that we're going through. So if I'm able to recover from it, can they recover from it? Will my relationship with them recover from that break or that challenge or that trauma, whatever it is? How do I put, safeguards in place to ensure that any difficulties or any challenges that I might be experiencing, whether it is personal, whether it is professional, whatever it is, that there are safeguards in place to ensure that those who are nearest and dearest to me, or those things that I need to stay stable, I need them to be stable, can actually stay stable, so that in my recovery, I have sure, pillars to be able to lean on. We oftentimes, when we're passing through challenges, and I'm going to give a situation. I had a role that I really it meant a lot to me. Um, this particular appointment, it really did mean a lot to me. And after 3 years, I was called aside um, by the business development manager. It was a conversation I wasn't expecting, but it was one that I found particularly hurtful. And he just effectively said, "Oh, he's had time to review the team, and he was very pleased with how things were going. Mind you, I was in the middle of my second conference which I was organizing, but that going forwards, his take was that the team looked better without my face in it. And it took a few minutes for that statement to land. And when it did, I said, I'm not sure I get what you're saying. He said, oh, just exactly what it said. The team looks better without your face in it. So came home, just sat back and thought, what am I supposed to make of that statement? And so when I tried to pursue it, I was told all sorts of things. Oh, you are very sensitive, there's nothing to it. Um, I said there is a lot to it, because to be told that in a group you have singled me out to say my face doesn't belong, but I've been doing a lot of heavy lifting. So what am I supposed to make of this? And I had 18 months of personal trauma just to unravel the situation that very quickly became quite toxic. It affected me in ways that I didn't know. It took a toll on my health. But at the time, I was determined to keep proving that I was more than capable, of keeping, my job, my position, every single thing. They were looking to restructure. I had been part of the team that had mapped out the restructure, but unbeknownst to me, there were decisions that had been taken that my role, even though I was part of the strategic group, should be made redundant. Now, had that been communicated to me with empathy in a way that I felt was respectful and had due regard for my efforts and the time I'd been at this organization, I looking back now, I think I would have I would have been devastated, but not to the extent in which I was, because I would have felt I was leaving with um, I was leaving honorably, and the way it was communicated was done in such a way that I felt dishonored, I felt disrespected, I felt taken advantage of, and those are emotions that you can't throw away, you can't just put down and walk away from, because they stay with you, they follow you, and it was just a very egregious period. But looking back, I needed to be able to walk away. But it took time for me to get to that point where I said to myself, Ashidu, you need to just walk away from this. But walk away knowing that I was walking away with so much, a lot of achievements. I had done a lot. I had, I had to physically quantify how I had achieved in that role to get to the place where mentally I felt able to put down the whole trauma of it and move on. But until you get to that point, you're never really quite ready to move on, because everything then acts as a trigger. How do you move past when you feel I have invested all of me? I have invested so much. I mean, I was traveling crazy, crazy, doing, crazy mileage for a job, and my children were very, very young at the time. So I felt I was sacrificing something so important to build a career that I am now being told I'm not worthy of, because somebody has come in and just is so disparaging. How do you get past that sort of, trauma? How do I build resilience to go on to the next job, to go on to the next project, to go into the next partnership without that driving how I relate to them? I needed to find ways to do that. And for me, I had to really dig deep. I had to I had to really take time to mentally align, what have I done in this role? How have I achieved? It is not, I think I had to. accept that I was too good to be there. And this was God's own way of pushing me on, so that the journey of healing, the journey of learning, the journey of bouncing back, the journey of feeling credible, able, the journey of feeling that I was going to thrive regardless could really begin. Now, this brings me then into how we respond to trauma, how resilience manifests, because it doesn't always manifest, as you said, positively. For some people, trauma hardens them. So what happens is everything becomes, I must overcome. It is a challenge. I take this on as, a do or die, as we say in Nigeria. I can't let this go. I have to just keep pushing to make sure that I get there. For some people, they're able to step away and ask the question, how do I learn? What lessons do I learn? I think when we spoke, one of the things I said to you was, I've become comfortable in seeing failure and as a huge learning point. It is a point in the success story and how you go on to build resilience, because I watch and I listen and I read about lots of successful people, and they're always keen to share instances of how they have majorly failed. And I never really understood it at first. But the more of those stories I listen to and I hear and I read about, it became apparent that they take from those moments how to go on to bounce back. They learn how to be more resilient, how to move on in the face of adversity. So it is not so much the success moments they are celebrating, it is that they are referencing how they've gone on to build themselves up, how they have adapted, how they become more agile in engaging and facing challenges and adversities. So I've come to see that as something that we all have to learn, use failure moments as learning points to test out almost what is our resilience and how resilient were we in this situation. What was it that made me feel not so resilient, or what was it that really brought my vulnerability, you used the term, to the fore? Why did I feel so exposed and needing to really buckle in and just keep pushing and powering through? And for some other people, like it did for me, I got to that point where it became, the best thing that had happened, where I saw myself in all my potential. I saw myself as, I couldn't be put down. I wasn't just a one. I couldn't be boxed in. There was so much to me. I'm a dynamic person. There's so much I bring to the table. And I think in stepping away from that, I saw all of my many talents and giftings and things that were sidelined just because I wanted to prove in this one small box that I was able. Um, there's a lot we can look at and explore in terms of resilience and what it means, and how we can harness that trait or that ability to be jet fuel for us in our desire to grow and move on. I think somebody's just put a question in environments where I can't read all of it. Sorry, can you just read it out for me, Dr. Ngozi, please?
I can take this. In environments where
Yeah,
vulnerability can feel like a
please.
risk, how do you navigate and overcome it while still building authentic relationships?
So, I mean, that's a fabulous question, because I was just going to touch on the impact on relationships. So, you have to. So, I'm going to speak personally now. Society has hardwired us to not allow ourselves to feel vulnerable. We have to cover. We have to, as a Black person, you have to always be, adept at code switching. And in the corporate space, you have to know who to open up to and who not to open up to. And that then becomes really challenging in building, maintaining, and fostering authentic, lifelong relationships, whether they be professional or whether they be personal. You have to accept personally that at some point in time, you will be tested. You will have to admit that in this situation, I feel completely exposed, helpless. I don't have the answers and I don't really know what to do right now. I need help. I need support. I need to step away from it because it is a bit much. And when you are able to admit that to yourself, what you start to do is you are quick to then seek out how, who has got what I need to move up and onward. So, who can help me heal? Who can help me recover well enough? It isn't always necessarily quick enough, that you have to recover immediately. It is who can help me recover well. So, who can I go to for advice, for support? Just even if it's just to allow me to just vent all of what I feel on the inside. They listen, and then I feel I have unburdened myself. So it's our take on vulnerability has been skewed because we take on the societal construct of you mustn't show weakness, you mustn't show that you have been offended, or that this has really put you at odds, or knocked you off kilter. But those are moments when people need to see and know that your humanity is very real. You can't always position yourself as this tower of strength, because that is when we fail the most. People then presume that whatever and however, we have the ability to keep going. But none of us has the ability to keep going. You must take time out always to reflect, to look after yourself, to acknowledge who is in your circle of influence or support and who isn't, who is committed and who isn't committed, and what it is you actually expect from these people. Because another thing with allowing ourselves to feel vulnerable is we can project unnecessary and sometimes unrealistic expectations on those around us. And that then can fracture what should otherwise be a healthy, well rounded, authentic relationship. I hope I've answered that, unless there's a follow on from that. I think you're on mute.
Okay. Yes. Thank you so much, Councillor Shedu. That was really I don't know. I don't know. I really connected to that experience, and it totally was very immersive. Let me put it that way. I was immersed in listening to you. And I think you've answered that question. So at this time, we just want to see if anyone has any more questions before we go on to the next speaker. If anyone has any questions, you can put it in the chat or you can unmute yourself and speak. Okay, I have one. So you talked about the society and the prayer and the let me use the language. Talked about the societal constructs of people, society thinking people must always be in a particular way. The society doesn't give that space for people to, be in that vulnerability. So putting pressure, and that puts pressure on people to be, they always put pressure to want to be in a particular way. They don't just, allow the space for that vulnerability. So do you think there could be differences in maybe different societies? Do you think, okay, David has a hand raised up. So do you think there could be differences based on different environments? Or do you think this is the same for all environment? I'm talking about the pressure from the society. Do you think there could be differences?
Thank you for that. There definitely are differences, and it is the presumption that there are no differences that I think challenges us further. So if we break it down, across cultures, we look at global patterns. What is a pressure, or what I consider a pressure as a Black British woman, is so not a pressure for me as a Nigerian. And I'll give an example. As a Black British woman, I mean, I was very confident and very comfortable in my 20s, to my late 20s, to my early 30s. Just enjoying being on my own, enjoying being, a woman who was now finding her footing in the career space and looking to move up. And the when I move across into my Nigerian space, it was, you don't seem to be bothered about the fact that you're not married, you're not this, you're not this, socializing then became rather than an enjoyable part of being a young woman. It then takes on a whole new meaning of, you are scoring, is this person suitable? And if you mention to any aunt or relative, the first thing they want to do is, I mean, Google was not, thank God for them that it was not Google, otherwise they want to start asking, who knows this and who knows that. But then coming into the workplace, now if we translate it into the workplace, societally, I am, as a Black British woman, I feel enabled and empowered to air my views in a setting, regardless of whatever hierarchies of seniority or leadership are in the space. It is that the connections or the levelings, we operate a very flat power system. But if I move into a situation where I am in a mixed global community, my cultural antennas become overly active, because I am looking at, how do I ensure that I don't cause offense in how I either address Miss A or Mr. B or Mr. C, but also then make sure that my white counterparts in the room don't feel left out of that conversation. So in how we define what makes us resilient, I can go through several iterations of resilience in one singular encounter, because I am moving and rotating multiple times very different expectations of how I ought to present myself. So we have this, you hear people say, I don't have a choice, I must just keep going. You hear that. I mean, within the university community, I'm sure you have students who say, I don't have a choice. They don't say it because really they don't have a choice. It is because culturally, the society they are coming from does not give you the room to fail. So you have no option but to keep going on. And for us, the way success is measured is not by showing up or making an attempt, it is by achievement. So I've had people say to me, what is the import of so many, degrees and accolades? And that is how we measure success. And so if somebody tries something once and doesn't achieve, they push themselves to breaking point. And then once they get it, they say, oh, I just, I'm very resilient. But were they really resilient? And what was the cost to them believing that they were resilient in that situation? So each society, as you navigate it, you find different constructs and expectations of what resilience, and adaptability and learning and belonging and thriving, what each of those words, what they mean. They don't always mean the same thing. They are not, homogeneous across communities and across societies. I think
Yeah.
David has got
David has got his hand.
hand up.
Um,
Hi, David.
okay, do you unmute yourself, David?
You're on mute, David.
Could you unmute yourself, David, please?
Yes, we can hear you now.
We can hear you
Yeah,
now.
okay. I have unmuted. Yeah, I want to thank Ashiedu for her very eloquent description of her own experiences and her perspective. And in particular, I just want to pay attention to what she was saying about her experience of exclusion in a particular context. And what I want to say is this, that today is important because one of the challenges of resilience, you never know what you're going to have to be resilient about. That the challenges are, you never know quite where they're going to come from. And what I
Absolutely.
mean by that is there are values that we have collectively fought for 50 or more years. I'm 65 in a few weeks' time. I've been campaigning since I was a teenager. So, people like us have fought against sexism and racism and homophobia and against climate change deniers and many other forms of oppression. We've done that, and we collectively, we've gained rights. We've asserted values of inclusion and diversity and equality and tolerance and respect and empathy for each other. And for someone like me, a white middle-aged guy, I'm not a colonialist. I've done everything I possibly can over the last 20 years to support and develop and encourage that there are people in the room, for example, and others, because they are smarter, better, cleverer. They've got different perspectives from me. What I really mean here is that if we look at the actions that are coming out of Washington and the Trump cabal, they affect us. They affect people like us. So just as one example, the USAID cancellation, that affects millions. So we know people in different African countries and other countries that actually they thought they had a job. They thought they had a useful role, which they did have, in terms of health, education, maternity care, nutrition, climate change, all sorts of things. And that has just been, cut.
Dissipated,
It's
yes.
been swept away brutally and illegally because 5 out of 4 Supreme Court judges in the US this week ruled that cut was illegal. We'll see what happens next. That's one example, which I fear could set back, millions could die.
Decades, yes, of work, yes.
Cuts to health research. My wife works in health research. We're appalled by what they're doing around cutting cancer research and things like that. But the final point I want to make is this. I mentioned diversity, equality, and inclusion. I believe in those values. And we have a policy from the US, which is backed by their backers. It is backed by the billionaires who, and Musk said this week, the biggest problem, the biggest disadvantage of Western civilization is that you have empathy. So he wants to take away empathy, the ability to understand what other people are going through. even in the US, they are trying to take steps to rule that Native Americans, First Nation Americans, Aboriginal peoples are not US citizens. They shouldn't be there. This is incredible. But this point about diversity, inclusion, and equality, they're trying to outlaw that. They're trying to ensure that US corporations or any organization that does business in the US has to take the same steps. Now, this is going to affect us here in the UK and in many other countries. If you are working with, Wellcome Foundation or any organization that is based in the US, they implement these policies against diversity, inclusion, and equality. That will affect all of us and many, many other people. This is what I fear. So we have to be resilient in recognizing not only, as Marshall McLuhan said many years ago, the personal is the political. The experiences that we have individually, which Asheda, you talked about some of your own experiences, are being experienced by many other people. We have to stand up. We have to confront. We have to organize. And I do believe I have backed, for as long as I can remember, I've said the best investment a society can ever make is to ensure that women are educated to, the limits of whatever education they want to have, and they are given the equal rights. Because you do that and you release the potential in terms of parenthood, in terms of organization. Women organize much, much better than men. Men are patriarchal. It's all about the boss and control and that sort of thing. We see that. Women are far better organizers, collaborators than men can ever be. All we can try to do is learn and research. And help share the message. So I am an optimist, but I think we really have to get real about the challenges and what we need to be resilient about. That's all. I've said enough.
Thank you so much, Professor Ray. And you gave us a broader perspective, and it got me. I didn't even think about it in this level, even though I'm aware of the news, but it's like you kind of like brought it in to make me, or to make us to see the impact and how this could even impact on the progress that has been made so far. Because now it's looking at like these policies are kind of would be like a negative, or would be a downward pressure on the progress that has been made. So the question is, are we now making policies that will now counter the progress that has been made so far? When you take off all these the aids and all that from the people that they use them, the jobs and the research and all that has been done. So I don't know, but to me, I feel like it's like going to be a negative effect on the progress that is made so far. Thank you so much for pointing that out. We will not be able to take any more questions because we have one.
I think you've got one in the chat.
We'll take it at the end because there should be some time after the next speaker. So, and then I also wanted to acknowledge, I didn't know when David joined, but I was going to acknowledge him. David was my supervisor for my doctoral research, and he's just recently resigned from the Montfort University, and he's now an emeritus professor. I just want to recognize him for the contribution and his help on my doctoral journey. So this is just a way of recognizing that. Thank you so much. And then we move on to the next speaker. Simon, are you ready?
I am ready, yes.
Okay,
absolutely.
so just a little bit. So Dr. Simon Hill is a seasoned property investor with a portfolio valued at over 15 million. Since 2022, they have been a dedicated educator specializing in entrepreneurship with a PhD in entrepreneurial characteristics and development. They are passionate about applied entrepreneurship and its broader economic impact. Beyond academia, Simon is an accomplished ultra-endurance athlete, taking on challenges like ultra-marathons and Ironman triathlons. Despite these achievements, they openly navigate mental health challenges, showing resilience and strength in all aspects of life. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Simon Hill. And I must say that Simon, when I first started teaching, Simon was one of the first people, the first colleagues that I happened to be in his team. And I must say, I really learned a lot. I don't know if I've told you that, but I really learned a lot on entrepreneurship, managing businesses, and there was this competition that he normally did for students, and it was really very, very good. I must say I really learned a lot from that. Thank you so much, Simon, and thank you for joining us today. So the floor is yours.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, let me just pop some slides up and hopefully that will work. Can you see those slides? Just give me a thumbs up if you can.
Yeah.
Yep, fantastic. All right. Thank you again very much, everybody, for taking the time to be here today. I think it's a really important conversation to have. Resilience. It's something that we all have, of course, experience of. Some, have been through, incredible trauma, and we all have our ups and downs in life. And it's. I think it's just, for me, it's about understanding those experiences, and trying to develop opportunities from them, and also trying to push our understanding of how those scenarios, and sometimes the things that seem like disasters, how we operate and effectively deal with them. So I wanted to kind of start off by firstly highlighting how, ultimately privileged I am, in the life that I have. I think this is something that I think we all need to take stock of from time to time. I am a father of two fantastic daughters. I've been married for 10 years, been with my wife for 20 years, since we were at school. And, without them, without my family behind me, I think, the achievements that I've been able to get to over the years, would be nowhere near. Now, Ngozi, you gave me a fantastic accolade there that my property portfolio is worth 15 million. Of course, it's 1.5. I wish 15, but hey ho, maybe in the future. So what I wanted to kind of do today was really just share some experiences with you, share some ideas, some kind of activities that I have, or actions that I have in my own kind of day-to-day life, to try and build that resilience, but also stretch it, because Ngozi, you had on your slides earlier on that image of the spring, and we sometimes we can be good at bouncing back, but inevitably sometimes we get stretched far enough that spring is very difficult. It doesn't quite spring back like it used to. But on the flip side, I do believe that, from personal experience, that it is also very possible to exercise that spring so that you can bounce back in a more effective way, depending on, the kind of things that you do. So I just wanted to start with, I was listening to a song this morning whilst I was working out, and this was, but in fact, this is the name of the song. It's all just a symptom of being human. I thought it was very apt for what I'll be talking about today. The band is called Shinedown, should you wish to pop it on Spotify. Okay, so there we go. The first thing I wanted to kind of really highlight is thinking about perspective. Perspective is one of those things that we know that actually, okay, if I look at it from a different perspective, if I reframe the situation, it can often make things seem a lot simpler, a lot easier, and less devastating. So, and then I've got a couple of stories I want to share with you on that topic. So when my oldest daughter was born back in 2016, she came 6 weeks early, which was a little bit of a surprise. You kind of, more of a surprise to my wife, obviously, than myself. But my wife did a fantastic job in the pregnancy and the delivery side of things. Because my daughter was early, she was rushed off to intensive care just to be checked over. And then about 20 minutes later, a consultant walked into me and my wife and asked me particularly to sit down. She had some news for us. And of course, as you can probably imagine, words like that terrify you. Now, fortunately, or unfortunately at the time, fortunately now, what the doctor told us was that my daughter didn't have a connection between her mouth and her stomach. So the esophagus didn't form in the normal way as they do in children. And there was no connection there. But my daughter's stomach was connected to her lungs instead. And as you can imagine, that's not quite good for how babies generally operate. So unfortunately, within the space of about 3 hours, my daughter had left the hospital that we were in Nuneaton or by Coventry, and was transported about 2 hours down to Cambridge, down there. And of course, at this point in time, my wife was still recovering from the birth, and we had to wait before we could leave, and obviously join our new daughter, down in Cambridge. Now, the process of my daughter having surgery and all the repairs being done. My daughter has had 9 surgeries since she was born, the first of which was less than 24 hours after she was born. As you can imagine, was traumatizing. We think about it at the time and thinking, how did we cope? How did we manage? But I find that often I kind of think about it now, and actually, we do cope. We are, as humans, we are incredibly resilient naturally. Particularly again, if for those of you that are parents, you'll know that there's always something that children bring, whether it's health issues or whether it's problems at school, bullies, all of that kind of stuff. It is always quite difficult, but it's also one of the most fulfilling journeys that you can take. Also one of the most frustrating, but also very fulfilling. And after my daughter had this surgery, she had various tubes going in her. She had a tube coming out of her back to drain away fluid and things. She wasn't well, and she was in the first room of the neonatal intensive care unit, which is considered the highest level of dependency. Now, whilst we were in there after she came out, we were, as you can imagine, anxious, waiting to see signs, waiting to hear from the surgeon to make sure everything had gone okay. But during that time, we had an experience, which was that in this room, there were 4 baby incubators, and we were one of them, and obviously there were 3 others. And unfortunately, there was a child that was opposite us that basically was having the last rites read to her. And it's, again, times like those that, as much as that process was quite traumatic and difficult, made us realise that, oh shit, I apologise, I'm going to swear a little bit here. We have, as much as right now it feels like our world is falling apart, actually it is nothing in comparison to what that family was going through. And it sticks with me to this day, 8-9 years later, that child didn't make it, and it was just incredibly harrowing to see what that happened. But I do often think, because we connected with that family, because we were staying in hospital at the same time, and we were living downstairs in the hospital itself, and we connected with them, and we still keep in touch. And they've now got the family has kind of rebuilt, developed, and they now have 2 children past that child that sadly passed away. Another kind of mini story and a little reminder for me when things are getting a little bit complicated in my head now is so for those of you that have seen me talk before on different topics, you'll know that I'm a bit of a geek, and I'm quite interested in my history. And so one of the things that hopefully you can see on my webcam here is this helmet. So this is a World War. This is a World War II German helmet. Now I don't. It's very easy to kind of think, well, you're British, why do you have a German helmet? But in most instances within warfare, more often than not, the individuals that are fighting the war are being forced to be there, and they don't. And I think it's often the political movers, as David mentioned earlier about Donald Trump and whatnot, that it's these single individuals or small group of individuals that unfortunately dictate often the deaths of many. But anyway, so I own this this World War II German helmet, but particularly one of the things that stands out for me with this helmet is the damage to it. So you'll probably struggle to see it on the camera, but where my finger is there, my middle finger, that is an entrance hole of a bullet, and as you can tell, it's quite small. It's very circular, and it looks like a bullet hole. Now, where that bullet hole came out is much more significant. And as you can see, the little dot inside, that's where the bullet hole goes through. Now, again, you could argue it's a little bit morbid, but again, for me, it's a reminder. It's not so much. I'm not celebrating war. I don't think I would be more than happy to not have any of that stuff. But for me, it's fascinating to understand what people have gone through in the past. Again, particularly in warfare and various other situations where the scenarios are terrible, disgusting, horrible, traumatizing. And my great granddad, who I was fortunate to know, was fought during the First World War. And he never talked about it. He refused. He would shake when anybody asked him about his experiences in the war. Anyway, onwards. So the next thing I wanted to kind of share was thinking about kind of how the mind works and how I have practiced resilience, and again attempted to stretch that mind cognitive muscle, as it were, in terms of making myself more resilient. Now, one of the things I did to do that was, as you can see on the screen here, these two individuals are going through special forces interrogation training, and I have had the privilege, is perhaps not the right word, but I've had the opportunity to undertake similar training. So at 3 o'clock in the morning in a field in Staffordshire, I had a bag put over my head, goggles put over, and I was dragged out of a van through puddles, put into stress positions like these individuals are here. Looks very easy to kind of be sat with crossed legs, but actually after sitting like that for 3 hours, you realise, on dirt and rocks, you realise it's not quite that easy. And then I was dragged into this barn. The hood was taken off my head, and I was interrogated by, if you've ever watched SAS Who Dares Wins on Channel 4, the interrogators that do the interrogation phase on that. Now, I paid for this opportunity, which seems like a very bizarre thing to do, but again, for me, it's about developing the mindset of, okay, what can humans actually do? Again, I'm very fortunate to have lived, a very privileged life, and so I want to put pressure and stress on myself to show that, okay, I can do more. When I feel like things are getting hard, recognize that, well, I've done this and I've done that, and I've experienced this and I've got through that. My PhD. I mean, I know most people say that doing a PhD is traumatizing. I mean, not you, Ngozi. Obviously, you had a fantastic supervisor, but I am not academic. As any of you have ever seen, well, you're hearing me talk now. I have no idea how I did my PhD, because writing is the most painful part of my job, and I know everybody says that, but I remember having my first Viva, because unfortunately I had two, and admittedly there were probably things that I missed and I should have understood. I certainly felt like I did enough pre-work and revision, but I remember just getting into the car after my Viva and just crying continuously, because I'd been mauled for 3 hours about everything that I'd done, but more specifically, everything that I'd not done. And as you pick yourself up and you realise that it's not the end of the world. There are far worse things in life for that to happen. But of course, at the time, it doesn't quite feel like that. You move on and you say, okay, well, pick yourself up. What do I need to do? What are my revisions? I had to do major revisions to my work, so got that through and whatnot. But it's interesting to just highlight what we can do versus what we think we can do. Because most individuals, and I find this with students a lot, as I'm sure many of you do if you teach, students very much are underconfident in terms of their abilities. But when we push them, when we kind of say, oh, well, come on, just give this a try, I mean, the number of times I've heard people say, I can't do a presentation, I'm too nervous. And then you nudge them towards doing it, and they do the presentation and they're better than everybody else in the room. How often does that happen? And it is so true that inner voice, that inner monologue that we all have, we just need to try and control to an extent and stretch. And again, that's one of the reasons for why I did this SAS training thing. How am I doing for time? Sorry, I didn't note how what time I started at, so just want to double check I'm not overrunning.
12:24.
Okay. And when do you want me to finish by? Start waving at me when you want me to stop, and go Z or Katie, and I will wrap up. All right. Another thing that I find particularly good for my mental health, and again from a resilience exerciser, is unsurprisingly exercise. So I've been fortunate. So my dad took me to live in New York when I was 13. So I lived in New York for 3 years, and the American culture, as you may well know, is very orientated around food. And so I would eat out at restaurants probably 5 days a week. And I would eat everything that I saw. And as you can imagine, again, the portions in America quite large. So I came back from America after living there for 3 years, about 18, 19 stone in weight. And to give you I'm 12-ish, 13 stone now. So I was reasonably overweight at the time. And I got into just exercise at the time. At about 16, I was just started doing a little bit of exercise every morning to try and lose this weight. And it created a really fantastic hobby for me. But then again, the idea of what is it possible to do? Okay, I can do a half marathon. Okay, that seems difficult, but once you completed it, it's a mental bucket list thing where you tick it off and say, okay, well, I've done that. Well, what's next? And that obviously then led to marathons, led to ultra marathons. So I've ran 40 miles around the circumference of Coventry. I've ran 100 kilometers in 24 hours. But by far my craziest achievement is what you see on the screen here, which is an Ironman triathlon, which Ngozi mentioned earlier in my intro. So, imagine 6 o'clock in the morning, you're at a lake with dirty water, fish, and it's dark. There are 1,000 other people there, and you've got to swim for 2.4 miles, which, to give you a time perspective, it's about an hour and a half of swimming. I mean, just the thought of that now, I couldn't swim for half an hour now, let alone an hour and a half. But then once you've finished that, you have to get out, run out, take your wetsuit off, and that's assuming you've not been kicked in the face whilst you've been swimming. and then get on your bike and cycle for 6 hours or 112 miles. And then, okay, well, once you've parked your bike up when you're finished, no, sorry, don't have a chance to rest. Go and run a marathon. I still struggle to comprehend that this is me in this picture, because it's amazing how quickly you can go from achievement of, oh my god, I've reached this goal, this personal achievement, to it just drops off incredibly quickly, both in fitness but also in terms of mental capacity. Back then it was, I know I can do this. I mean, I used to come to work at DMU at 6:30 in the morning. I'd swim for an hour, and then I'd get changed, go into the gym, and then run for another half an hour or things like that. And so, again, it's all developmental in terms of your capacity for resilience. But again, that resilience could, whilst you're stretching it actively, it can also very quickly start contracting again if you are not continuing to put yourself under that pressure. But yeah, I would highly recommend it. Should you wish to do something really silly and have an anecdote to talk about in these kind of situations, give an Ironman triathlon a go. If I can do it, anybody can. But I will warn you, it does take quite a lot of effort and quite a lot of money as well, because there's a lot of money involved in terms of buying bikes and all sorts of silly things like that. Okay, so whilst up until now you may kind of think, okay, well, this guy's a bit crazy, he's done all of these big things, and he's done his PhD and all of this kind of stuff, and whenever I see him in the office, because obviously many of us work together, he's always quite confident, he's happy, he's jovial. But generally the reason for that, certainly over the last 18 months, is because I've been medicated. So 18 months ago, last November, or November, October time, I was finding myself, I'm really fortunate, I'm able to take my kids to school, usually most mornings, depending on my teaching timetable. And I'd drop my kids off to school and I'd walk home. It takes me about 10 minutes to walk home. And on that walk home, I'd be crying. And I couldn't put my finger on it. I didn't understand it. I'm so fortunate to be in the situation that I'm in. Again, to be in a happy marriage, happy family. To have our own house and all of that kind of stuff, and also have obviously the business and a stable job that I really enjoy. And yet, again, I was getting upset. I was struggling to sleep. I was waking up in the middle of the night, not being able to go back to sleep. And as I just said, just crying almost for no reason. And obviously, crying is one thing, but crying as a man is almost seen as, again, culturally, even it's the next step. It's like, and admittedly, part of me in my head would do the classic thing of saying, "Man up," or get over it. You've got nothing to worry about. Give yourself that perspective. Pick up the helmet perhaps and think about that. But sometimes it's not enough. Yeah, and I'm very fortunate that one of my best friends is a general practitioner, a GP, and we've had many conversations about this, and talking about the chemical hormonal imbalances that we have and can have in our heads, and they come and go. It's not necessarily you are a depressed person, somebody that suffers with anxiety. You are somebody that will always suffer from anxiety. It will come and go in waves. Part of it might be things to do with your diet. I think a lot of it for me is exercise based, because I've had an injury for unsurprisingly the last 2 years. I think part of that is the reason why I've had to start medicating, was because I would utilize exercise as a meditation practice. I could go for a run and I could run for 3, 4, 5, 10 miles. And I would find it incredibly meditative in terms of thinking about work, thinking about stuff I need to do. Whereas now, because I'm struggling to do that, I think that has had an impact upon, again, my chemical imbalance and how that influences. So I think, my key message with this image that you see on screen is, don't be afraid to ask for help. Not necessarily, I mean, in terms of talking to people, talking helps, as inevitably we all know, although it can be incredibly difficult to make that first step of talking about this stuff. But as I found, talking about being on medication, every time I mention it, it gets that little bit easier. It makes it more normal to talk about, being on medication, but also, again, just struggling, not being able to, because by talking about it, it leads to more opportunities about problem solving and whatnot. All right, I think this is nearly the final slide, so you'll be glad to know. As you know, if you've seen me talk before, I am a bit of a Rubik's Cube nerd, and there are various reasons for that. One of the reasons is perseverance / resilience, because if you can solve a 3x3x3 Rubik's Cube, then generally you can solve a 13x13 Rubik's Cube. The process of how to do it is more or less the same. Yeah, there are some slight differences, some different algorithms that you need to learn to be able to undertake it. But the biggest problem, or the biggest hurdle with solving this 13x13, is the time that it takes to do. So this took me 5 hours to do, whereas I can solve a 3x3 in about 90 seconds. It takes a long time. It hurts your hands because it's quite heavy. It's very big in terms of gripping your hands around. But for me, one of the reasons I do it, well, there's a couple of reasons. A, there's developing perseverance, and being able to kind of push myself to do it and learn how to do it. But also, it takes my mind to a different place. I am somebody that is very very bad at ruminating, i.e., catastrophizing, thinking about things over and over again. What if this happens? What if that happens? What if, all those different scenarios. And so I utilize my Rubik's Cube, whether it's a 3x3, a 2x2, a 5x5, or whatever it is, as, again, another meditative thing to focus on. Because whilst I'm focusing on, okay, that needs to go there, that needs to go there, and a lot of it becomes muscle memory in the fingers, but there is still quite a lot of thought that goes into it. And whilst the thought's going into that, it's not ruminating on something that's going on in my world at that time and thinking, okay, I need to deal with that, get on with that, so on and so forth. So, I mean, I know, if any of you, I will wrap up now, Ngozi. If any of you have ever bought a Rubik's Cube, again, just a simple 3x3x3, and picked it up, had a few little twiddles with it, and thought, no, I can't do that, I would urge you, as something, again, that's good for you, I believe is good for your mental health and good for your achievements, is just get a Rubik's Cube and don't try and solve it randomly, because you are not going to do it like that. Take some lessons, get yourself onto YouTube, watch a video. You'll have to probably watch it in slow motion, because that's what I did, because they still move really fast. But it's amazing how, again, first time I solved it probably took me 8, 9, 10 minutes to do, and now I can generally do it in about a minute 10, a minute 20. 90 seconds is the average.
Simon, can we just clear up that you've got no affiliation? This is not an ad.
This is not an ad. You're absolutely right. No, I wish I was part of the Rubik's Cube empire, but no, I think it's no, it is just my weird little nerdiness thing. That I would, if you want to get a cheap, good Rubik's Cube, get yourself onto AliExpress. Again, all of my Rubik's Cube. I mean, this one. So Rubik's Cubes are generally quite cheap. You're looking at £2, £3, £4, £5. This Rubik's Cube was £80 because it's just because it's so intricate and has so many, the internal workings of it are very complicated. So yeah, but yeah, nerdy things. Right, final thing. Again, I think I don't want to say that I've had it difficult, because I know many others have had life more difficult. And but life is a roller coaster, and whilst I look back on my childhood, and one of my first teachers at primary school used to call me half a job hill, because I was very good at starting a job but very bad at finishing it, and I think that probably came out in my PhD as well, and many of the things that I do today. But it's okay to be, as it says on the screen, slightly awkward and kind of weird. I say this to my students all the time, that I like strange music. I collect Lego and Rubik's cubes and World War II stuff, but at the same time, I feel like I'm doing pretty well, and I'm fortunate to have my family, my friends, my colleagues, and also a really pretty successful business as well. So it's about, for me, it's just constantly pushing myself, trying to expand that resilience zone, knowing that sometimes it will start contracting on itself, but recognizing that, okay, when that does happen, right, okay, well, let's start pushing it again. Let's try something else. Let's buy another house. My phone just rang because an estate agent's calling me about another property that I'm buying. But try and just recognize and have that self-awareness of when your resilience zone is perhaps contracting, and perhaps you need to give it a little stretch. Go and buy a Rubik's Cube and see what you can do. Right, I'll stop waffling. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. Happy to take any questions if there are any.
There is actually a question in. It says, in challenging times such as battling anxiety and depression, what strategies have helped you stay connected, build resilience, and maintain supportive relationships?
Good question. Let me just read it again, just so I can.
It's like a few questions in one, isn't it, sometimes?
Yeah. I've got a small brain, so it takes me a while to kind of suck things in. Yeah, so, the strategies, obviously the Rubik's Cube is, I think, a key strategy. Exercise is a key strategy. But again, it's so cliche now. But talking about stuff, I think, and having somebody to talk to. And as much as me and my wife have been together for nearly 20 years, admittedly, there are some things that I still struggle to talk to her about. And I think that's okay. I think we all need to we can't unload everything onto one single person, the significant others that we have in our lives. But have other options of people to speak to, whether that be colleagues. I know when I first discussed about being on antidepressants earlier on this year, I had several colleagues message me directly and said, "Oh, me too, me too," and that again opened up a really great opportunity to just to unload and talk about stuff. It is one of those things that it's not necessarily going to go away, but with effective management, with whether it's talking therapy, I was very fortunate to have some talking therapy with NHS Warwickshire, which was really helpful. But I think ultimately that just comes down to talking, and you can do that with anybody down at the pub, in the office. So many opportunities for that kind of conversation, and it's about destigmatizing it. I think now, in comparison to 15, 20 years ago, we've moved significantly further towards destigmatization, if that's the word. But of course, inevitably we've still got further to go. But I think we are moving in the right direction in most ways. American politics is something very different, but let's not get into that now, because that's a whole different can of worms.
Yeah, I have a question. Thank you so much for answering that. I have a question. When you talked about the recognizing when you think your resilience is, that level when it's reducing, and then being able to, work on it. So, does that come with a feel? How do you know?
How do you know if your resilience is dropping? Um, it's difficult. I mean, self-awareness is one of those things, and it's the same whenever we talk to students about reflection. Reflection should be a really easy process, but actually can be one of the hardest processes. And I find that, for me, how do I try and do it? I mean, I try and do it just before I go to sleep at night, because I've been very good recently, and certainly the last 6 months, with putting my phone down and not having my phone in my hands when I'm in bed. And when I'm just kind of closing my eyes and kind of getting to the point of the right time to go to sleep, just taking a few minutes just to kind of assess the day. And now, admittedly, I do this earlier on in the evening as well. So 9 o'clock, I've got a little reminder that reminds me to do a journal. So I write a journal, not a academic journal, obviously. Don't do one of those every night. That'd be nice. But just a reflection on what my day's been like. What's the great things in the day been? What have I struggled with? And I find sometimes writing it out on my phone. I use a great app called Day One, I think, and it allows me to put pictures in there, write templates, so you can kind of ask yourself questions and feedback. Because I think sometimes by writing it, you're almost having a conversation with yourself. Because sometimes if you're just living in your head and you're just having it's very easy to get distracted. If you've ever tried to do proper meditation, where you clear your mind and you take deep breaths, and all of a sudden you start thinking, oh, my daughter's got that competition at school next week. I've got to do that, and I've got to get that booked in, and I've got to, my car needs its MOT. No, I'm supposed to be meditating. Right. Think of nothing. Okay, deep breaths, and then your mind goes to somewhere else. So actually, perhaps writing it out is, on an app or in a physical notebook. I think that might be a useful tool. But thinking about that reflection, I think is really critical.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Simon, for sharing the experience. There are so many other questions, but we'll take the questions. Let me just wrap up, and then we'll take further questions as time permits. So, thank you for sharing your experience on different perspectives and bringing in a different dimension to the discussion, which really helped to highlight so many things. Looking at the different perspective when there is an issue, and learning from looking at it in a different perspective, that also helps you to have a positive outlook. And then also the importance of movement. I saw how movement helps in exercising. You also talked about the things and the various activities that you do and how that helps. And then trying to meditate, clear your head, writing it down, and then games. I found that very interesting. I didn't think of that, but you highlighted that and how that helps you to, trying to solve something difficult, engaging in that activity, and then also conscious reflection or continuous reflection. I think I'll put it that way, because that helps you to begin to be aware. Because if you are not aware, like you said, you won't even know. And then before you realize, you might just break, and then it's now difficult, or it will take time for you to get back or to bounce back to or get that level of stability. So it was really very interesting listening to you, and we really learned, and I also really learned. And thank you so much, Councillor Shedu, for giving us the perspectives of your experience in how you got into the workforce from a different environment, and then being able to adjust and then grow to leadership position, and sharing your experience on how you found self-development, understanding yourself, understanding people, and then introspection, thinking about yourself, and not always putting fault on others, but thinking, could it be me? What could I do better? And also building your support, knowing who to speak to, knowing, being able to reach out to people in the workplace and asking for help. That really gave us also a different dimension, and knowing that, yes, when we understand our own vulnerabilities, we can actually thrive. It's not about being so perfect. It's about understanding that, yes, and acknowledging that this can actually happen and this has happened. And then what can we do? And the little actions that we could take. So that has been a very interesting discussion, Dr. Simon and Dr. Ashedu. I really do enjoy having you here. And I don't know how time went. I don't know if everybody feels this way, but that's how I feel. Like, where did the time go? And now we have to wrap up. It's really been a very interesting session today. So in the next minute, what we will do now is a bit of a reflection. So I'm going to play soft music. And if you just want to reflect on what you learned today for maybe 1 or 2 minutes, think about what you learned today and then see what can you pick from it. You don't have to say it. You don't have to tell me. I just wanted to think. I just wanted to reflect because I didn't even realize that someone was going to say it. But I'm glad that Simon mentioned it because it's what has helped him. So that means this is really significant. Think about what we've discussed today. Think about everything that has been said today for a minute. And then after that, we can now fill in this questionnaire. But I want us to just, you can put it down, what you have learned. You can just write it down. So this is like an experience, think about what you have learned, what you think, what you feel. For like, you can close your eyes if you want. You can lay back, but let's just think about what we've learned today and think about our own experience. How do you think it can benefit you? Or what can you pick? So in the next 1 minute, I won't be saying anything. We'll just reflect. You can reflect and make notes if you want. Okay. How does that feel? You don't have to share what it's, just take notes of it and that's for you. But for the purpose of this event, I would like us to share our feedback on what we think, and I'm gonna be sharing my screen so you can access the QR code, and you can scan that on your phone or you can use the chat. I pasted the link in the chat. So it's a very short survey. And after this, we can take the rest of the questions. Thank you, Kate, for that beautiful summary. There's a question for Simon. He said, did you have a mentor when you started?
Good question. I mean, when you started, I mean, when did I start? I mean, it's a good question. I'm really fortunate that again, both my parents are still alive, still together. Yeah, they obviously my first mentors. My mum is my emotional mentor. My dad is my logical business mentor. And again, I owe them a hell of a lot in terms of who I am today. Um, and yeah, I mean, in terms of professional mentors, not so much. I dibble, yeah, kind of every so often I will work with somebody for a little while, but I've never kind of done it necessarily professionally. It's always been more friendships that have developed, and I've just then worked with those individuals about within professional contexts as well as personal scenarios. So yeah, but again, I think my dad is probably my biggest mentor because whatever I need help with, he's whether it's financial, whether it's spreadsheets, whether it's just talking through a problem, it's he's really valuable.
Oh, that's good. That's good to hear.